The locomotive's whistle split the summer air of Yreka, California, like a knife through butter, and Grace Jameson stood on the platform with his hat pulled low, watching the wrong woman step off the train. It was August of 1882, and the afternoon sun beat down on the dusty town with relentless fury. Grace had been expecting Miss Catherine Whitmore, a petite blonde from Boston who had exchanged exactly 17 letters with him over the past 6 months. The photograph she had sent showed a delicate woman with carefully arranged curls and a practiced smile. But the woman who descended from the train car, gripping a worn carpetbag and blinking against the harsh California light, was most decidedly not Catherine Whitmore. She was tall, nearly matching Grace's own height when her boots hit the wooden platform. Dark hair, the color of polished mahogany, had been pulled back in a simple braid that hung over one shoulder. Her dress, a practical navy cotton rather than the fashionable silks Catherine had described in her letters, bore the dust and creases of long travel. But it was her eyes that caught him, wide and dark as a mountain lake at midnight, filled with equal parts determination and barely concealed terror. "Mr. Jameson?" she asked, her voice carrying a slight tremor. "Grace Jameson," he should have corrected her. Should have told her that he was waiting for someone else, that there had been some mistake. Instead, the word that came out of his mouth was, "Yes." "I am Zelda Zimmerman," she said, extending a gloved hand that shook slightly. "I have traveled from Philadelphia. I apologize for my appearance. The journey was considerably more difficult than I anticipated." Grace took her hand, aware that his calloused palm dwarfed her slender fingers even through the thin fabric of her glove. Something in her handshake, firm despite the trembling, spoke of a strength that the delicate Catherine's letters had never hinted at. "Welcome to Yreka, Miss Zimmerman." Her shoulders sagged with visible relief. "Thank God. I was afraid that perhaps the arrangements had fallen through, that you might not be here." The arrangements, Grace's mind raced. This woman clearly thought she was expected, but who was expecting her? Yes, the arrangement for marriage. "I know we have not exchanged photographs, and that the entire process has been quite rushed, but I assure you that I am a woman of my word. I will honor the commitment I made in my letters." Her chin lifted with a pride that seemed at odds with her obvious exhaustion. It clicked into place with horrible clarity. His younger brother, Grant Jameson, had also been seeking a mail-order bride. They had laughed about it together, two bachelor brothers running a struggling ranch, both desperate enough to seek wives through correspondence. But Grant had died 3 weeks ago, thrown from a horse that had spooked during a thunderstorm. His neck had broken instantly, and Grace had buried him on the hillside overlooking their property, beneath a cottonwood tree that Grant had loved. This woman had been coming for Grant. She had been traveling while his body was already cold in the ground, while Grace had been burning his brother's letters in the fireplace, unable to bear reading the dead man's hopes and plans. The honorable thing would be to tell her, to explain the mistake, to offer her a room at the boarding house and money for a ticket back to Philadelphia. Grace opened his mouth to do exactly that. "She's the right one," he heard himself say instead, the words coming from somewhere deep inside him that had nothing to do with logic or honor. Zelda's expression shifted from nervous tension to cautious hope. "I am glad you think so. I must confess, I have been terribly anxious about this meeting. The letters were so brief, and I know so little about you beyond your occupation in this town." "Let me take your bag," Grace said, reaching for the carpetbag. It was heavier than he expected, and when she handed it over, their fingers brushed. Even through her gloves and his work-roughened skin, he felt something pass between them like an electric current. "I have a trunk as well," Zelda said, gesturing toward the freight car. "It contains my belongings, my books and teaching materials." Teaching materials. Yes, I was a school teacher in Philadelphia. I thought perhaps I might continue that work here if the town has need of a teacher. You never mentioned it in your letters whether Yreka had a school. She looked at him with those midnight eyes, and Grace felt his deception settling over him like a heavy coat. "We have a schoolhouse," he said truthfully. "The teacher left last spring to get married. The position is still open." That much was honest. Mrs. Henderson had departed in April, and the town council had been scrambling to find a replacement before the fall term began. Zelda's entire face transformed when she smiled. The exhaustion fell away, replaced by a radiance that made Grace's chest tighten. "That is wonderful news. I had hoped to be useful, to contribute something beyond simply keeping house. Not that I am ungrateful for the opportunity for marriage, but I have always loved teaching, and the thought of giving it up entirely was rather difficult to bear." Grace arranged for her trunk to be delivered to his ranch, then helped her into his wagon. As they rolled through Yreka's main street, he pointed out the various establishments. The general store run by old Marcus Webb. The saloon that stayed busy enough to keep its owner, Dutch Frank, in fine suits despite the town's modest size. The church where Reverend Samuel Patterson preached every Sunday. The blacksmith shop, where Tom Chen worked his forge, one of the few Chinese men who had stayed after the railroad work dried up. Zelda took it all in with an intensity that suggested she was memorizing every detail. "It is smaller than I expected," she said, but there was no disappointment in her tone. "More intimate. In Philadelphia, one could walk for blocks and never see a familiar face. Here, I imagine everyone knows everyone. For better or worse," Grace agreed. "Privacy is a rare commodity in a town this size." She glanced at him, and he wondered what she saw. He was 32 years old, lean and weathered from a life spent outdoors. His dark blonde hair needed cutting, and his face bore the permanent tan of a man who worked in the sun. He had been told he had his mother's eyes, a pale gray-green that looked almost colorless in certain light. But he had his father's strong jaw and broad shoulders, the Jameson build that made both him and Grant look like they were carved from the same rough timber. Grant. God, what was he doing? This woman had come here to marry his dead brother, and he was leading her out to his ranch like she belonged to him. "Are you all right, Mr. Jameson?" Zelda asked. "You look troubled." "Call me Grace," he said, "and I am fine. Just thinking about all that needs to be done before winter." "Grace," she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. "It is an unusual name for a man." "Family name," he explained. "My great-grandfather on my mother's side. She insisted on carrying it forward." "I like it," Zelda said simply. "It suggests a certain gentleness." No one had ever accused Grace Jameson of gentleness before. He was known around Yreka as a hard worker, a fair dealer, and a man you did not want to cross. But gentle, that was not a word associated with him. The ranch lay 5 miles outside of town, nestled in a valley where the Shasta River provided water for his cattle and horses. The house was modest, a 4-room structure that he and Grant had built themselves 7 years ago when they had pooled their money and bought the land. Grace had spent the past 3 weeks cleaning frantically, trying to erase the bachelor mess that had accumulated. He had even bought new curtains from Mrs. Henderson before she left, though he had no skill for hanging them properly. Zelda surveyed the property with an assessing eye as Grace helped her down from the wagon. The barn needed a coat of paint, and one of the corral fences listed slightly to the left, but the house itself was solid. He had built it to last, with thick walls and a good roof that did not leak even in the hardest rains. "It is lovely," Zelda said, and he could hear that she meant it. "I can see the mountains from here." Mount Shasta dominated the eastern horizon, its snow-capped peak visible even in summer. Grace had always found comfort in that mountain, a permanent fixture in a changing world. "It is always there," he said. "On clear days, you can see it from everywhere in the valley." He showed her inside, acutely aware of how sparse the furnishings were. The kitchen contained a cast-iron stove, a table with 4 chairs, and open shelves holding his meager collection of dishes and cookware. The main room held 2 worn armchairs positioned in front of a stone fireplace, a small bookshelf with perhaps a dozen volumes, and little else. There were 2 bedrooms, one that had been his, and one that had been Grant's. Grace had moved all of Grant's belongings out of the second bedroom 3 days ago, unable to stand the sight of his brother's empty bed and abandoned clothes. Now it held only a bed frame with a straw mattress, a wardrobe, and a small dresser with a cracked mirror. "This will be your room," Grace said, setting her carpetbag down just inside the door. "I know it is not much, but you can arrange it however you like. If you need anything at all, just tell me and I will get it for you." Zelda turned to look at him, confusion clear on her face. "My room? I do not understand. We are to be married, are we not?" Grace felt heat creep up his neck. "Yes, but I thought, I assumed you would want time to adjust before the marriage was consummated. We barely know each other." Her expression softened. "That is very considerate of you, Grace. Most men would not be so thoughtful." She moved closer to him, close enough that he could smell the lavender water she wore, faint beneath the dust of travel. "I appreciate your respect for my comfort. Shall we say a month? That should give us time to become properly acquainted before we proceed with the more intimate aspects of marriage." "A month," Grace agreed, his voice rougher than he intended. "That seems reasonable. When shall we marry? I assume you have made arrangements with your minister." He had not, of course, because he had been expecting Catherine Whitmore, and now he was perpetrating a deception that grew larger and more tangled with every passing moment. "I will speak with Reverend Patterson tomorrow. Perhaps next Sunday, if that suits you." Next Sunday would be perfect. Zelda smiled at him again, and Grace felt something in his chest crack open, something that had been frozen solid since Grant died. He left her to unpack and went outside to tend to the horses. The physical labor of unhitching the wagon and brushing down the animals gave him time to think, though his thoughts circled like buzzards over carrion. He should tell her the truth. Every moment he waited made the deception worse, more unforgivable. But when he came back inside and found her in the kitchen, her sleeves rolled up and her hands already working to prepare a meal from the meager supplies in his larder, he could not bring himself to speak the words that would send her away. "I hope you do not mind," Zelda said, glancing up from the onion she was chopping. "I thought I could make a supper. You must be hungry, and I find that cooking helps me settle into a new place." "I do not mind at all," Grace said, watching her capable hands move with practiced efficiency. "I have to confess, my cooking skills are limited to what will not poison a man." She laughed, a warm sound that filled the kitchen. "Then we shall make a good team. I can cook, and you can keep us from starving in other ways, I presume?" "I can hunt and fish and raise cattle," Grace said. "I can fix most things that break and build most things that need building, but I cannot make a decent biscuit to save my life." "Biscuits are simple once you know the trick," Zelda said. "I will teach you if you like." They ate together at the kitchen table as the sun set beyond the windows, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Zelda had made a simple stew from salt pork and vegetables, but it tasted better than anything Grace had eaten in weeks. She asked him questions about the ranch, about his cattle and his plans for expansion, and he found himself telling her things he had not spoken aloud to anyone. "I want to build up the herd," he said. Right now, I have maybe 50 head, but the land could support twice that. I have been saving money, planning to buy more stock in the fall, and I want to improve the bloodlines, bring in a better bull to strengthen the calves. You sound passionate about it, Zelda observed, her dark eyes reflecting the lamplight. It is all I have ever wanted, Grace admitted. A place of my own, land that belongs to me, animals to tend. My father was a farmer back in Missouri, but he never owned his land. He rented from a man who charged too much and cared too little. When he died, we had nothing. I swore I would never be in that position, never be at the mercy of someone else's whims. Is that why you came to California? Grace nodded. My brother and I came out here in 1875 after our mother passed. We worked on other men's ranches for 6 years, saved every penny we could. When we finally had enough to buy this place, it felt like we had won the world. He stopped abruptly, realizing he had mentioned Grant without thinking, but Zelda did not seem to notice the slip. She was looking down at her plate, her expression thoughtful. I understand that feeling, she said quietly. The need to have something that is truly yours that no one can take away. It is part of why I agreed to come here. Why did you agree? Grace asked. A woman like you, educated and capable, could have found opportunities in Philadelphia. Why travel across the country to marry a stranger? Zelda was silent for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her water glass. When she spoke, her voice was low and steady. My father died 2 years ago. He was a professor of literature at a small college, and he left me a modest inheritance. Enough to live on if I was careful. But his colleagues at the college, they began to pressure me. One in particular, a married man named Dr. Whitfield, became quite insistent that I accept his protection. When I refused, he made it clear that he would make my life difficult. He began spreading rumors, suggesting that my father and I had been inappropriately close, that my morals were questionable. Grace felt anger kindle in his gut. That is despicable. It is the way of the world, unfortunately, Zelda said with a bitter smile. A woman alone is always suspect, always vulnerable. I could have continued to fight, could have tried to defend my reputation, but I was tired of fighting. When I saw the advertisement for a mail-order bride, it seemed like a door opening. A chance to start fresh, to build a new life where no one knew my history or Dr. Whitfield's lies. You will be safe here, Grace said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. No one will harm you or spread lies about you. I will make certain of that. Zelda met his eyes, and he saw tears glistening in hers. Thank you. You cannot know what that means to me to hear those words and believe them. They cleaned up the supper dishes together, moving around the kitchen with surprising ease despite their newness to each other. Grace showed her where he kept the dish soap and towels, and Zelda washed while he dried. It felt domestic and comfortable, like they had been doing this for years rather than hours. When she excused herself to retire for the night, Grace sat in one of the armchairs by the fireplace and stared into the cold hearth. He had not told her the truth, had let her go to bed believing that they had been corresponding, that he was the man she had agreed to marry. Tomorrow, he would tell her. Tomorrow, he would explain about Grant and give her the choice to stay or go. But tomorrow came, and Grace found himself riding into town alone while Zelda stayed at the ranch, organizing her belongings and beginning to make the house her own. He went to the church and found Reverend Patterson in his office, reviewing notes for Sunday's sermon. Grace Jameson, the Reverend said, standing to shake his hand. I have not seen you in church since Grant's funeral. How are you managing? As well as can be expected, Grace said. I have come to ask you a favor. I need you to perform a wedding ceremony next Sunday. Reverend Patterson's eyebrows rose. A wedding? I was not aware you were courting anyone. It is a marriage arrangement, Grace explained, the lies coming more easily now. A woman from Philadelphia, a mail-order bride. She arrived yesterday and we would like to marry as soon as possible. I see. The Reverend's expression suggested he saw more than Grace wanted him to. These arrangements can be tricky, Grace. Are you certain this is what you want? You have been through a great deal of grief recently. Perhaps you should take more time to consider. I am certain, Grace said firmly. Her name is Zelda Zimmerman, and she is a good woman, a school teacher. I think the town council would be interested to know that we might have a candidate for the vacant teaching position. That shifted the Reverend's attention, as Grace had known it would. The lack of a school teacher was a constant source of concern for the community. A school teacher. Well, that does put a different light on things. Perhaps you could bring Miss Zimmerman to meet with the council. We could discuss the position and ensure she is qualified. I will mention it to her, Grace promised. But about the wedding, can you perform the ceremony next Sunday after services? Reverend Patterson nodded slowly. I can do that. But Grace, I want you to think carefully about this. Marriage is a sacred bond, not something to be entered into lightly. If you have any doubts, any reservations, it is better to address them now than to regret your choices later. I have no doubts, Grace said, and he was surprised to realize it was true. In the space of one day, Zelda Zimmerman had become essential to him in a way he did not fully understand. The thought of telling her the truth, of watching her board a train back to Philadelphia, was unbearable. He stopped at the general store on his way home and bought supplies. Flour and sugar, coffee and tea, a bolt of fabric in a deep blue that reminded him of Zelda's dress. Marcus Webb rang up his purchases with knowing eyes. Heard you had a visitor arrive yesterday, Marcus said casually. Tall woman with dark hair. News travels fast, Grace observed. This is Yreka. News is our primary form of entertainment. Marcus grinned. She your mail-order bride, then? The one your brother was expecting. Grace's hand stilled on the package of coffee. What makes you say that? Grant was in here a month ago, buying up all sorts of things. New linens, fancy soaps, talking about fixing up his room for his bride. Figured when I saw a strange woman get off the train with you, that had to be who she was. Marcus's expression turned sympathetic. Must be awkward having her show up after Grant passed. You tell her what happened. Not yet, Grace admitted. I am going to, but the timing has not been right. Better do it soon, Marcus advised. The longer you wait, the harder it will be, and if someone else tells her first, she will never forgive you for the deception. Grace knew Marcus was right, but he loaded his supplies into the wagon and headed home without confronting the truth he was avoiding. When he arrived back at the ranch, he found Zelda hanging the new curtains he had bought weeks ago. She had found his ladder and climbed up to thread the rod through the fabric loops, her sleeves rolled up and her hair escaping from its braid. Those look good, he said, setting down his packages. She turned to smile at him, and the sight of her in his house, making it better and brighter just by her presence, made his deception feel like a stone in his chest. I hope you do not mind. I found them in the bedroom wardrobe and thought they were meant to be hung. They were, Grace said. I just did not know how to do it properly. Well, now they are up, and the place already feels more like a home. She climbed down from the ladder, and Grace moved to steady it without thinking. His hands bracketed her waist as she descended, and even through the layers of her dress and petticoats, he could feel her warmth. She looked up at him when her feet touched the ground, her face close to his. Thank you. It was nothing, Grace said, but he did not step back, and neither did she. I spoke with Reverend Patterson today, he said, forcing himself to focus on practical matters. He will perform the ceremony next Sunday. I also mentioned to him that you were a school teacher. The town needs one, and he suggested you meet with the town council to discuss the position. Zelda's face lit up. Truly? Oh, that would be wonderful. I was afraid that my hopes of continuing to teach were unrealistic, but if there is actually a position available, that changes everything. The council meets Thursday evening, Grace said. I will take you into town, introduce you to the members. You are too good to me, Zelda said softly. I know this arrangement was not based on romantic notions, but you have been so kind, so thoughtful. I want you to know that I appreciate it, and I will do everything in my power to be a good wife to you. Grace felt the weight of his lie pressing down on him like a physical force. Zelda, there is something I need to tell you. But before he could continue, she stepped closer and placed her hand on his chest, right over his heart. Whatever it is, it can wait. Right now, I just want to enjoy this moment, this feeling of having found a place where I might belong. Her touch scattered his thoughts like dandelion seeds on the wind. He covered her hand with his own, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath their joined palms. You do belong here, he said, and that at least was the absolute truth. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both strange and natural. Grace worked on the ranch during the day, mending fences and tending to his cattle, while Zelda organized the house and began planning lessons for the school year. In the evenings, they cooked together and talked, sharing stories of their pasts and their hopes for the future. Grace learned that Zelda had lost her mother when she was 12, that she had essentially raised herself while her father buried himself in his books and teaching. She had learned to cook from a neighbor woman, Mrs. O'Brien, who had taken pity on the motherless girl. She had attended a women's college in Philadelphia, one of the few institutions that would accept female students, and had graduated with honors in literature and pedagogy. Zelda learned that Grace had been working since he was 10 years old, that he had never had formal schooling beyond the most basic reading and arithmetic. She discovered that he loved poetry despite his rough exterior, that he had taught himself to read better by poring over his mother's old books on lonely nights. She saw the way he gentled wild horses with patience and quiet words, the way he treated every animal on the ranch with respect and care. On Thursday evening, Grace drove Zelda into town for the council meeting. She had dressed carefully in her best gown, a deep green that made her eyes appear even darker. She had pinned her hair up in an elaborate style that must have taken considerable time, and Grace found himself unable to stop looking at the curve of her neck, the way a few loose tendrils of hair curled against her skin. The town council consisted of 5 members: Reverend Patterson, Marcus Webb, Dutch Frank from the saloon, Dr. Alina Grayson, who ran the town's medical practice, and Judge Thomas Whitaker, who presided over legal matters. They met in a room above the general store, and Grace introduced Zelda to each of them in turn. Dr. Grayson, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, questioned Zelda extensively about her educational background and teaching philosophy. Zelda answered with confidence and grace, explaining her belief that education should be accessible to all children regardless of their social station or gender, that the purpose of schooling was not just to impart facts, but to teach students how to think critically. What about discipline? Dutch Frank asked. Some of these children can be quite wild. We have had teachers leave because they could not control the classroom. I believe in firm but fair discipline, Zelda said. Children need boundaries and structure, but they also need to feel respected and valued. If you treat them like criminals, they will behave like criminals. If you treat them like scholars, they will rise to meet your expectations. Judge Whitaker nodded approvingly. Well said, Miss Zimmerman. I think you will do well here. The council voted unanimously to offer Zelda the teaching position, with a salary of $35 per month and use of the schoolhouse. She would begin after her wedding, with classes starting the first week of September. As they drove home under a sky full of stars, Zelda was practically glowing with excitement. "I cannot believe it. I have a position, a real teaching position, and they are paying me the same wage they paid the male teacher before Mrs. Henderson. That almost never happens back east." "You earned it," Grace said. "You impressed them with your knowledge and your passion. They would have been fools not to hire you." Zelda leaned against his shoulder, a gesture that felt both innocent and intimate. "This is all working out better than I ever dreamed. A new home, a husband who respects me, a job doing work I love. It feels almost too good to be true." Grace's hands tightened on the reins. Her words were a knife twisting in his gut, a reminder of the lie that stood between them. He had to tell her the truth. He had to give her the choice to walk away before they married, before the deception became permanent. "Zelda, I need to tell you something," he began, but she had already straightened up, pointing excitedly at the sky. "Look, a shooting star. Make a wish quickly." Grace looked up and saw the bright streak of light arcing across the heavens. Zelda closed her eyes, her lips moving silently as she made her wish. When she opened them again, she was smiling. "What did you wish for?" Grace asked. "I cannot tell you or it will not come true," Zelda said. "But I will say that I wished for happiness, for both of us." Grace made his own silent wish then, a desperate plea to whatever forces governed the universe. He wished for the courage to tell the truth, and for Zelda's forgiveness when he did. But when they arrived home and Zelda kissed him on the cheek before retiring to her room, her lips soft and warm against his skin, Grace knew he was not going to tell her. Not tonight, and possibly not ever. He was going to marry her on Sunday and spend the rest of his life making her so happy that the deception would not matter, that it would be buried beneath layers of genuine love and devotion. It was selfish and wrong, and Grace knew it. But he also knew that he had never wanted anything as much as he wanted Zelda Zimmerman to be his wife. Sunday arrived with perfect weather, the sky a brilliant blue, and the temperature warm but not oppressive. Zelda dressed in the best gown she had brought from Philadelphia, a dove-gray silk with pearl buttons. She had woven wildflowers into her hair, purple lupines and yellow buttercups that Grace had picked for her that morning. The church was full of townspeople, curious to see Grace Jameson's mail-order bride. Grace stood at the altar in his only suit, his heart pounding so hard he was certain everyone could hear it. When Zelda walked down the aisle toward him, her hand resting lightly on Marcus Webb's arm since she had no family to give her away, Grace felt time slow down. She was beautiful. Not in the delicate, fragile way that society admired, but in a strong, vital way that took his breath. Her eyes met his, and he saw trust there, faith in him and in the future they were building together. Reverend Patterson performed the ceremony with solemn dignity, speaking of the sacred bonds of marriage and the responsibilities that came with them. Grace repeated his vows in a voice that did not shake, promising to love and cherish Zelda, to protect and provide for her in sickness and in health, for as long as they both lived. When it was Zelda's turn, she spoke her vows clearly, her hand steady in his. "I promise to honor and respect you, to stand beside you in times of joy and times of sorrow, to be your partner and your helpmate, for as long as we both shall live." "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Patterson said, and Grace pulled Zelda close. Her hands came up to rest on his shoulders, and when their lips met, he felt something inside him shift and settle into place, like a lock clicking shut. The kiss was chaste and brief, appropriate for a church full of witnesses, but it sent heat racing through Grace's veins. Zelda's cheeks were flushed when they pulled apart, her eyes bright with emotion. The congregation applauded and people crowded around to offer congratulations. Dr. Grayson hugged Zelda warmly, welcoming her to Yreka. Marcus Webb clapped Grace on the shoulder with a knowing grin. Even Dutch Frank, not known for his sentimental nature, wished them well. They held a small reception at the ranch, with food and drink that Zelda had prepared over the past few days. Neighbors came by with gifts, practical things like quilts and preserves and tools. Tom Chen, the blacksmith, brought a beautiful iron hook for hanging pots, wrought with delicate scroll work. Mrs. Olivia Martinez, who ran the boarding house, gave them a crate of her home canned vegetables. As the sun set and the guests began to depart, Grace found himself alone with his wife. His wife. The word felt foreign and wonderful in his mind. Zelda had changed out of her wedding dress and into a simple cotton gown. She was cleaning up the remnants of the reception, stacking plates and wrapping leftover food. Grace moved to help her, and they worked in comfortable silence. "It was a lovely day," Zelda said finally. "Everyone was so welcoming, so kind. I feel like I have found a community here, not just a husband." "You have," Grace assured her. "Yreka takes care of its own." Zelda set down the plate she was holding and turned to face him. "Grace, about tonight. I know we agreed to wait a month, but we are married now. If you would prefer to, that is, if you wanted to consummate the marriage tonight, I would understand." Grace felt desire war with honor in his chest. He wanted her, had wanted her since the moment he first saw her step off that train. But he had made her a promise, and he intended to keep it. "The agreement was a month," he said. "I am a patient man, Zelda. I can wait until you are truly ready." Relief and something that might have been disappointment flickered across her face. "You are a rare man, Grace Jameson. Most husbands would insist on their rights." "You are not a possession," Grace said. "You are my wife, my partner. Your comfort and happiness matter to me more than my own desires." Zelda crossed the space between them and wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face against his chest. Grace held her, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the warmth of her body against his. They stood like that for a long moment, not speaking, just being together. When she finally pulled back, there were tears on her cheeks. "I am so glad I came here," she whispered. "I was so frightened on that train, so uncertain about what I was doing. But you have made me feel safe and valued in a way I have never experienced before." Grace wiped her tears away with his thumb, his heart aching with the weight of his deception. "You deserve to feel safe," he said. "You deserve everything good this world has to offer." That night, they retired to their separate bedrooms, but Grace lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the woman sleeping just beyond the wall. He had married her under false pretenses, had let her believe he was someone he was not. But with every day that passed, it became easier to forget that the letters she had written were meant for Grant, not for him. It became easier to believe that perhaps fate had intervened, that she was meant to be his all along. The following weeks settled into a comfortable routine. Zelda began preparing for the school year, visiting the schoolhouse and taking inventory of supplies. She wrote to educational publishers back east, requesting new textbooks and materials. Grace helped her clean the schoolhouse, repairing broken desks and whitewashing the walls. In the evenings, Zelda began teaching Grace to read better, patiently working through more complex texts with him. She discovered that he had a natural affinity for poetry, that he could understand metaphor and symbolism in ways that surprised her. They read Shakespeare together, Grace stumbling over the archaic language while Zelda gently corrected and encouraged him. One night, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Zelda asked him about his family. "You mentioned your father was a farmer and your mother passed away," she said. "Do you have any other family, brothers or sisters?" Grace felt his throat close, This was it, the moment where he had to tell her about Grant or compound his lies even further. "I had a brother," he said carefully. "Grant. He died a few weeks before you arrived." Zelda's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, Grace, I am so sorry. Why did you not tell me?" "You must have been grieving, and here I came, a stranger disrupting your life." "You did not disrupt anything," Grace said. "You saved me, in a way. After Grant died, I felt lost. The ranch felt empty, and I did not know how to move forward. Then you arrived, and suddenly I had a reason to get up in the morning to make plans for the future." It was the truth, if not the whole truth. Zelda moved closer to him, taking his hand in both of hers. "Tell me about him. What was Grant like?" Grace found himself talking about his brother, about the boy who had followed him west with nothing but hope and determination. He told her about Grant's easy laugh, his terrible singing voice, his uncanny ability to win at cards. He talked about how they had worked side by side to build the ranch, how Grant had always been the optimistic one, convinced that their next season would be the one where everything came together. "He sounds wonderful," Zelda said softly. "I wish I could have met him." The irony of her words was not lost on Grace. She would have met Grant if Grace had not intercepted her at the train station. Grant would be the one sitting here with her now, holding her hand and building a future with her, unless Grant would have told her the truth. Unless Grant would have explained the mistake and sent her back to Philadelphia with money for her trouble. Grace would never know what his brother would have done, because Grant was dead and Grace had made his choices. "He would have liked you," Grace said, and that at least was absolutely true. Grant would have loved Zelda's intelligence and strength, her kindness and her determination. August faded into September, and Zelda began teaching at the Yreka school. She had 19 students ranging in age from 6 to 14, children of ranchers and shopkeepers and miners. Grace drove her into town each morning and picked her up each afternoon, using the time in between to handle ranch business and make improvements to their property. He watched Zelda transform as a teacher, saw her passion and skill on full display. She was patient with the younger children and challenging with the older ones. She taught them reading and writing, arithmetic and history, but she also taught them to think critically, to question and analyze rather than simply memorizing facts. The town fell in love with her almost as quickly as Grace had. Parents praised her methods and her dedication. Students who had been indifferent to learning suddenly showed interest and improvement. Dr. Grayson stopped Grace on the street one day to tell him that Zelda was the best teacher Yreka had ever had. At home, Grace and Zelda continued to grow closer. They cooked together, read together, talked late into the night about everything and nothing. Zelda told him about her dreams of one day opening a library in Yreka, a place where anyone could access books regardless of their ability to purchase them. Grace told her about his plans to expand the ranch, to eventually breed horses as well as raise cattle. The month Grace had promised Zelda was nearly up when everything changed. It was a Tuesday evening in late September. Grace had just returned from driving Zelda home from school when he noticed a horse tied to his porch rail. The animal was unfamiliar, a chestnut gelding with white stockings and the kind of quality that suggested an expensive purchase. Grace helped Zelda down from the wagon, his hand on the small of her back as they approached the house. The door opened before they reached it, and a man stepped out onto the porch. He was young, perhaps 25, with carefully pomaded blonde hair and expensive Eastern clothes. His face was handsome in a soft way that suggested he had never done hard physical labor in his life. When he saw Zelda, his entire expression lit up. "Catherine," he exclaimed, hurrying down the steps toward them. "Thank God I have found you. I have been searching everywhere." Zelda went rigid beside Grace. "Mr. Whitfield, what are you doing here?" The man, Whitfield, came to a stop a few feet away. His eyes moved from Zelda to Grace and back again, confusion replacing the initial joy. "I came to bring you home, of course. When I discovered that you had fled Philadelphia, that you had run away like a common criminal, I knew I had to find you and make you see reason." "I did not run away," Zelda said, her voice cold as winter frost. "I left of my own free will to start a new life away from your harassment." "Harassment?" Whitfield looked genuinely bewildered. "Catherine, I was only trying to help you. A woman alone with no male protection is vulnerable to all sorts of dangers. I was offering you my assistance, my guidance." "You were offering me a position as your mistress," Zelda snapped. "You, a married man, were suggesting I become your kept woman. When I refused, you attempted to destroy my reputation." Whitfield's face flushed. "I never, that is, you misunderstood my intentions. I was simply concerned for your welfare." Grace had heard enough. He stepped forward, placing himself between Zelda and Whitfield. "The lady has made her position clear. She is not interested in your concern or your assistance. I am going to have to ask you to leave my property." "Your property?" Whitfield's eyes narrowed as he looked at Grace properly for the first time. "Who are you?" "I am Grace Jameson," Grace said. "Zelda's husband." The word husband felt good on his tongue, felt right in a way that pushed back some of the guilt he had been carrying. Whitfield's face went pale, then red, then pale again. "Husband, Catherine, you cannot be serious. You married this cowboy, a man so far beneath your station. You would throw away everything you could have had for life as a rancher's wife in this God-forsaken wilderness." "My name is Zelda," she said, stepping up beside Grace. "And yes, I married Grace. He is twice the man you could ever be, and I am happier here in this God-forsaken wilderness than I ever was in Philadelphia." "But you barely know him," Whitfield protested. "How long have you even been here?" "A few weeks. A month. You cannot possibly have made such a life-altering decision so quickly." "I know enough," Zelda said firmly. "I know that Grace treats me with respect. I know that he values my mind as well as my person. I know that he has given me opportunities and freedom that I never would have had back east. And I know that I love him." The words hung in the air between them, and Grace felt his heart stop and then restart with a thunderous beat. She loved him. Zelda loved him, not Grant, not the man who had written the letters, but him. Grace Jameson, the man who had lied to her from the very beginning. Whitfield made a scoffing sound. "Love? You speak of love as if it is something real, something lasting. Love fades, Catherine. Security, position, those are what matter in this world." "Then I pity you," Zelda said, "because you will never know what it is to truly connect with another person, to build a life based on mutual respect and affection rather than calculation and self-interest." "I came all this way," Whitfield said, his voice rising with frustration. "I spent weeks tracking you down, following a trail of letters and rumors across the entire country. I did that because I care about you, because I want to help you." "No," Zelda said, her voice steady and sure. "You did that because you cannot stand to be refused, because your pride was wounded when I rejected you. But I am not going back with you, Mr. Whitfield. Not now, not ever. This is my home and Grace is my husband, and I am asking you to leave." Whitfield looked at her for a long moment, and Grace could see the man's internal struggle written on his face. Finally, Whitfield's shoulders sagged in defeat. "If that is truly what you want." "It is," Zelda confirmed. Whitfield nodded slowly, then turned to Grace. "Take care of her. She deserves better than what I offered, better than what most men are capable of giving. If you hurt her, I will hear about it, and I will come back." "I will not hurt her," Grace said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. They watched Whitfield mount his expensive horse and ride away, his straight back radiating wounded dignity. When he was finally out of sight, Zelda turned to Grace with tears streaming down her face. "I meant what I said," she whispered. "I love you, Grace. I know it is too soon. I know we have barely known each other a month, but I cannot help how I feel. You have given me everything I ever dreamed of and so much more." Grace pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. "I love you too," he said, the words torn from somewhere deep inside him. "From the moment I saw you step off that train, I knew you were meant to be mine." It was the closest he had come to admitting the truth, and Zelda pulled back to look at him with confusion in her eyes. "What do you mean? From the moment I stepped off the train?" We had been corresponding for months before that. This was it. This was the moment where Grace had to tell her everything or commit fully to the deception. He looked into her midnight dark eyes, at the woman who had become the center of his world in such a short time, and he made his choice. "I mean that all the letters in the world could not have prepared me for the reality of you," he said. "The photographs you sent did not capture your strength, your intelligence, the way your eyes light up when you talk about teaching. I thought I knew who you were from our correspondence, but meeting you in person, I realized I did not know anything at all." It was not exactly a lie, though it was not the full truth either. Zelda seemed to accept his explanation, a soft smile replacing the confusion on her face. "I felt the same way," she said. "Your letters were so brief, so focused on practical matters. I thought you were going to be dour and serious, concerned only with the ranch and nothing else. But you have been so much more than I expected. You are kind and thoughtful. You appreciate poetry and beauty. You respect my work and my dreams. You are everything I never knew I wanted." Grace kissed her then, not the chaste kiss of their wedding, but something deeper and more passionate. Zelda responded with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his shirt as she pulled him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grace rested his forehead against hers. "I know we agreed to wait a month," he said, his voice rough. "But that time is nearly up, and after what you just said, after Whitfield showing up and you choosing me, I cannot wait any more. I need you, Zelda. I need to make you mine in every way possible." "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, Grace. I am ready. I have been ready." He swept her up into his arms, carrying her into the house and to the bedroom that had once been Grant's and was now theirs. He laid her on the bed with reverent care, his hands shaking slightly as he began to unfasten the buttons of her dress. Zelda helped him, her fingers working at his shirt buttons while he struggled with the complexity of her garments. They undressed each other slowly, discovering skin and curves and the geography of each other's bodies. Grace had been with women before, quick encounters in saloons and brothels that had been about physical release and nothing more. This was different, sacred almost, the joining of two people who genuinely cared for each other. He was careful with her, conscious of her innocence and determined to make the experience as pleasurable for her as possible. Zelda clung to him, gasping his name as he moved above her, her nails digging into his shoulders. When it was over, they lay tangled together, sweat slicked and breathless. "I did not know it could be like that," Zelda whispered. "The other women I knew, they always spoke of marital duties as something to be endured, not enjoyed." "Those women were not married to the right men," Grace said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "What we just shared, that is how it is supposed to be between husband and wife. Pleasure and connection, not just duty." They made love again that night and then fell asleep in each other's arms. Grace woke in the darkest hours before dawn with Zelda pressed against his side, her breathing deep and even in sleep. He looked at her face, peaceful and beautiful in the moonlight streaming through the window, and felt the weight of his deception settling over him like a heavy blanket. She loved him. She had chosen him over Whitfield, over the life she could have had back east. She had given herself to him completely, with trust and faith and genuine affection. And he had built their entire relationship on a lie. Grace knew he should tell her the truth. He should wake her up right now and explain that he was not the man she had been corresponding with, that she had come to Yreka to marry his dead brother. He should give her all the facts and let her decide whether she wanted to stay or go. But even as he thought it, Grace knew he was not going to do it. He was going to take his secret to the grave, was going to spend the rest of his life making Zelda so happy that the truth would not matter. He would be the husband she deserved, would give her everything she wanted and needed, would love her with every breath in his body. It was selfish and wrong, and Grace accepted that. He accepted that he was a liar and a deceiver, that he had stolen his brother's bride and made her his own. But he also knew that he would do it again, would make the same choices if given the chance, because Zelda Zimmerman had become essential to him in a way that defied logic or morality. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Grace's life. He and Zelda fell into the rhythms of married life with surprising ease. They worked together to improve the ranch, with Zelda proving to be a capable hand with the animals despite her city upbringing. She learned to ride, though she never quite conquered her nervousness around the larger horses. She helped with the fall branding, managing the record-keeping while Grace and hired hands did the physical work. At the school, Zelda continued to excel. Word of her teaching prowess spread beyond Yreka, and Grace was approached by parents from neighboring towns asking if their children could attend. Zelda worked with the town council to develop a plan for accepting boarding students, families who would pay a small fee to have their children stay with local families during the school week. In October, Grace took Zelda to Sacramento to purchase supplies and books for the expanding school. It was their first real trip together, and Zelda was thrilled by the adventure. They stayed in a hotel, a luxury Grace rarely indulged in, and spent 2 days exploring the city. Grace bought her a fine leather-bound journal and a set of pens, while Zelda insisted on purchasing him a new hat to replace the battered one he had been wearing for years. On the train ride home, Zelda rested her head on Grace's shoulder and talked about their future. "I want to have children," she said softly. "At least 3 or 4. I want to fill that house with love and laughter." Grace felt a fierce joy at her words. "I want that too. I want sons to help run the ranch, daughters to spoil and protect. Sons and daughters to educate and raise to be good people," Zelda added. "Children who know they are loved, who have opportunities and choices." "They will have all of that," Grace promised. "I will make certain of it." That night, back in their own bed, Grace made love to his wife with renewed passion and purpose. The thought of Zelda growing round with his child, of watching her become a mother, filled him with emotions he could barely name. November brought the first snows, early for the region but not unheard of. Grace worked hard to ensure the cattle had adequate shelter and feed for the winter months ahead. Zelda helped him organize the barn, setting up a system for tracking supplies and managing inventory that made everything run more smoothly. On Thanksgiving, they hosted a dinner at the ranch for people who had no family in the area. Tom Chen came, along with Dr. Grayson, Marcus Webb, and several of the ranch hands who worked for neighbors. Zelda cooked for days, preparing a feast that would have done justice to any fancy Eastern restaurant. The house was full of warmth and laughter, people sharing stories and jokes around the table. As Grace looked around at the gathered friends, at his wife presiding over the table with grace and joy, he felt a contentment he had never known before. This was what he had been working toward his entire life: a home filled with good people, a woman he loved by his side, a future bright with promise. The only shadow on his happiness was the secret he carried, the truth about Grant and the letters. Grace had convinced himself that it did not matter, that the past was irrelevant compared to the present they were building. But late at night, when Zelda slept beside him, Grace sometimes felt the weight of his deception like a stone on his chest. December brought news that rocked the small community. Dutch Frank's saloon burned down one night, the fire started by a drunk patron who had knocked over a lamp. The building was a total loss, and Frank lost everything he had built over the past decade. The town rallied to help, with people donating money and materials to help him rebuild. Grace contributed both money and labor, spending long days helping to clear the rubble and lay the foundation for a new building. Zelda organized a fundraising social at the school, with the students putting on performances and the parents contributing food and auction items. They raised over $200, enough to cover the cost of lumber for the new saloon. In the midst of the rebuilding effort, Zelda came to Grace with news that made his heart soar. "I am with child," she said, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Dr. Grayson confirmed it yesterday. We are going to have a baby, Grace." Grace swept her up into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "We are going to be parents," he said, wonder in his voice. "You are going to be a mother." "And you are going to be a father," Zelda said, cupping his face in her hands. "Our child is going to be so loved, so blessed to have you as a parent." They told their friends at Christmas, during a gathering at the church. The congratulations were heartfelt and enthusiastic, with nearly everyone having advice or stories to share. Dr. Grayson took Zelda aside to discuss prenatal care and what to expect in the months ahead. Marcus Webb insisted on giving them a cradle he had in storage, hand-carved by his grandfather and passed down through generations. As 1883 began, Zelda continued teaching through her pregnancy, though Dr. Grayson insisted she needed to stop by March at the latest. The town council agreed to hire a temporary replacement for the remainder of the school year, with the understanding that Zelda would return to teaching once the baby was old enough. Grace threw himself into preparing for fatherhood. He built a crib with his own hands, painstakingly sanding every surface until it was smooth as silk. He repaired and painted the spare bedroom, transforming it into a nursery. Zelda sewed curtains and baby clothes, her hands never idle during the long winter evenings. One night in February, as they sat together by the fire, Zelda reading while Grace carved a wooden rattle for the baby, she suddenly set down her book and looked at him with an odd expression. "Grace, can I ask you something?" "Of course," he said, setting aside the half-finished rattle. "When we were corresponding before I came here, you mentioned that you had a brother. Grant, you said his name was. But in the letters, you never talked about him in the past tense. You always spoke as if he was still alive, still working the ranch with you." Grace felt ice form in his veins. "What do you mean?" Zelda stood and went to the bedroom, returning with a small wooden box. Grace recognized it immediately, his heart sinking. It was the box where Grant had kept his personal correspondence, the box Grace had thought he had hidden well enough that Zelda would never find it. "I was looking for extra blankets in the wardrobe and I found this," Zelda said, opening the box. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all in a feminine hand that Grace did not recognize. "These are from Catherine Whitmore. The woman you were supposed to marry, the woman who was supposed to step off that train." Grace could not speak, could not move. The moment he had dreaded for months had finally arrived. "I read them," Zelda continued, her voice steady but her hands shaking. "All of them. And Grace, they do not sound like you." The man who wrote responses to these letters, he was cheerful and optimistic, always talking about his dreams for the future. You are many wonderful things, but cheerful and optimistic are not words I would use to describe you. Zelda, I can explain, Grace started, but she held up a hand to stop him. I also found this, she said, pulling a photograph from the box. It was a picture of Grant, taken shortly before his death. He was smiling, his face open and young in a way that Grace's had never been. This looks like you, but younger, happier. Is this your brother? Is this Grant? Yes, Grace whispered, the word torn from him. Zelda sank back into her chair, the photograph clutched in her hand. Tell me the truth, Grace, all of it. I deserve that much, so Grace told her. He explained about Grant's death, about being at the train station to meet Catherine Whitmore and seeing Zelda instead. He confessed that he had known immediately that she was the wrong bride, that she had been meant for Grant. He admitted that he had lied to her from the very beginning, had let her believe he was the man she had been corresponding with. I knew it was wrong, Grace said, his voice raw with emotion. I knew I should tell you the truth, should give you the choice to leave. But from the moment I saw you, I could not let you go. You were everything I had ever wanted, everything I had not known I needed. So I lied and I kept lying, and I made you fall in love with a deception. Zelda sat in silence for a long moment, her face pale and expressionless. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold. So our entire marriage is based on a lie. Everything we have built together, everything we have shared, it was all founded on your deception. Not everything, Grace protested. My feelings for you, they are real. The life we have built, that is real. The only lie was how we met, the circumstances of your arrival. The only lie, Zelda's voice rose, anger finally breaking through her shock. You let me believe you were someone else. You let me think I was marrying the man I had been corresponding with, the man I had made an agreement with. You stole me from your dead brother, Grace. You took what was meant to be his and claimed it as your own. Grant is dead, Grace said desperately. He could not have you. And yes, I know it was wrong, I know I should have told you, but I could not. I could not risk losing you. So instead, you risked this, Zelda said, gesturing between them. You risked destroying the trust that is the foundation of any marriage. You risked making me question everything I thought I knew about you, about us. Tears were streaming down her face now, and Grace reached for her, but she jerked away from his touch. Do not, she said sharply, do not touch me right now. Zelda, please, Grace begged. I love you. That has never been a lie. Everything I have done, every choice I have made since you arrived, has been because I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. But you do not respect me, Zelda said bitterly. If you did, you would have given me the truth. You would have let me make my own choices instead of manipulating me into a marriage based on false pretenses. You are right, Grace admitted, his voice breaking. You are absolutely right. I was selfish and wrong, and I have no excuse for what I did. But please, Zelda, do not let my mistakes destroy what we have built. We have a good life together. We have a child on the way. Do not throw that away because I was too much of a coward to tell you the truth in the beginning. Zelda stood, wrapping her arms around herself. I need time, she said. I need to think about this, to process what you have told me. I cannot make any decisions right now. Of course, Grace said quickly. Take all the time you need. I will give you space. I will give you anything you want. Just please do not leave. Do not take our child away from me. I am not going anywhere tonight, Zelda said. I am exhausted and it is the middle of winter, but I will sleep in the spare room. I cannot share a bed with you right now. Grace nodded, his heart breaking as he watched her walk away. She paused at the door to the spare room and looked back at him. Did you ever love your brother? She asked quietly. More than anyone in the world, Grace said, until I met you. Then how could you betray him like this? Zelda asked. How could you take something that was meant to be his and not feel any guilt? I felt guilty every single day, Grace said. But I also felt grateful because I had you. And I am sorry, Zelda. I am sorrier than I can ever express. But I am not sorry that you are my wife. I am not sorry that we built this life together. I am only sorry that I lied to make it happen. Zelda closed the door without responding, and Grace was left alone in the main room. He sank down into his chair and buried his face in his hands, his body shaking with silent sobs. He had known this day might come, had known the consequences of his deception. But knowing it and living through it were two different things entirely. The next few weeks were the darkest of Grace's life. Zelda was polite but distant, treating him like a stranger rather than her husband. She moved through the house like a ghost, barely speaking unless spoken to. She slept in the spare room, and when Grace tried to talk to her to explain or apologize again, she simply walked away. Grace threw himself into work on the ranch, spending long hours in the cold and snow to avoid the painful silence in the house. He repaired fences that did not need repairing, organized tools that were already organized, did anything to keep his hands busy and his mind occupied. The town noticed the change in their dynamic. Dr. Grayson pulled Grace aside after church one Sunday to ask if everything was all right. Marcus Webb commented that Zelda looked tired and sad, asked if there had been some kind of trouble. Grace deflected their questions and concerns, unwilling to air his failures publicly. It was Dr. Grayson who finally forced the issue. She came to the ranch one afternoon in early March and insisted on speaking with both Grace and Zelda together. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where they had shared so many meals and conversations, and Dr. Grayson looked between them with sharp, assessing eyes. "I am here as your doctor," she said bluntly, "and as someone who cares about both of you. Zelda, the stress you are under is not good for the baby. Your blood pressure is elevated and you have lost weight rather than gaining it. Whatever is happening between you and Grace, it needs to be resolved before it has serious health consequences." "I am aware of the risks," Zelda said stiffly. "Are you?" Dr. Grayson asked. "Because from where I sit, it looks like you are willing to sacrifice your health and possibly your child's health because you are angry with your husband. And while I do not know what he did, I do know that nothing is worth endangering your baby." Tears welled up in Zelda's eyes. "He lied to me about everything. Our entire relationship is built on deception." Dr. Grayson looked at Grace with raised eyebrows. "Care to explain?" So Grace explained again, the words coming easier this time though no less painful. He told Dr. Grayson about Grant, about the mix-up at the train station, about his decision to keep the truth from Zelda. When he finished, Dr. Grayson was quiet for a long moment. Then she sighed. "That was incredibly stupid of you, Grace." "I know," he said miserably, "but it was also understandable, Doctor." Grayson continued. "You had just lost your brother. You were grieving and alone. This beautiful, intelligent woman showed up and you saw a chance at happiness. You took it in the most spectacularly foolish way possible, but you took it." She turned to Zelda. "And you, my dear, have every right to be angry. What Grace did was wrong, and he should have told you the truth from the beginning. But the question is not whether he made a mistake. The question is whether that mistake is worth throwing away everything you have built together." "How can I trust him?" Zelda asked, her voice breaking. "How can I believe anything he says when our entire marriage started with a lie?" "Trust is rebuilt through action, not words," Dr. Grayson said. "Grace needs to prove to you through his behavior and his choices that he is worthy of your trust, and you need to decide whether you are willing to give him that chance." She stood, gathering her medical bag. "I am leaving you two to talk, but Zelda, I want to see you in my office tomorrow. We need to discuss how to manage your stress levels for the remainder of this pregnancy. And Grace, you need to figure out how to make this right. That woman is carrying your child. She deserves your very best, not the coward who lied to her. After Dr. Grayson left, Grace and Zelda sat in silence. Finally, Grace spoke. I do not know how to make this right. I do not know what I can say or do to earn your forgiveness, but I am willing to try. I am willing to spend the rest of my life proving to you that I am worth your trust. Zelda looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in weeks. Why did you do it, Grace? Why did you lie to me instead of just telling me the truth and courting me honestly? Because I was afraid you would leave, Grace said simply. You came here expecting to marry Grant. If I had told you he was dead, you might have gotten back on that train and returned to Philadelphia. I could not take that risk. So you took away my choice, Zelda said. You decided what was best for me without giving me any say in the matter. Yes, Grace admitted, and that was wrong. You deserved the truth, deserved the right to make your own decisions. I took that away from you because I was selfish and scared. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel? Zelda asked, her voice thick with emotion. To know that the man I love, the man I trusted completely, saw me as something to be manipulated rather than a partner to be honest with. I never saw you that way, Grace protested. I saw you as precious, as something I could not bear to lose. But you are right that I should have trusted you with the truth. I should have had faith that you would choose to stay, that what we could build together would be worth staying for. Zelda was quiet for a long time, her hands resting on her swollen belly. Grace watched as the baby moved beneath her dress, a visible ripple that made his heart ache. That was his child, his and Zelda's, a life they had created together. I do not know if I can forgive you, Zelda finally said. Not right now, maybe not for a long time. What you did was a betrayal of my trust, and that is not something that can be fixed with apologies and promises. I understand, Grace said, though the words felt like knives in his chest. But, Zelda continued, I also do not want to raise this child in a broken home. I do not want our baby to grow up feeling the tension between us, wondering why their parents do not love each other. And despite everything, despite the lies and the betrayal, I do still love you, Grace. I hate that I do, but I cannot seem to stop. Hope flickered in Grace's chest, fragile as a candle flame. What are you saying? I am saying that I am willing to try, Zelda said. I am willing to work on rebuilding trust, on finding a way forward. But Grace, if you ever lie to me again, if you ever keep something important from me, I will take our child and leave. I will not spend my life with a man I cannot trust. I will never lie to you again, Grace swore. I will be completely honest with you, even when the truth is difficult or painful. You have my word. Your word did not mean much before, Zelda said, but there was less ice in her voice now. But I suppose I have to start somewhere. They talked late into the night, the conversation sometimes painful, sometimes hopeful. Grace answered every question Zelda asked, no matter how uncomfortable. He told her about Grant's personality, about the things his brother had written in his letters. He explained why he had not corrected her mistake at the train station, walking her through his thought process and admitting how flawed it had been. Zelda, in turn, talked about how the deception made her feel. She explained that it was not just the lie itself, but what it represented. The fact that Grace had not trusted her with the truth, had not believed she would choose to stay if given all the facts. She felt diminished by it, reduced from a partner to a possession that needed to be tricked into staying. I need you to see me as an equal, Zelda said. Not as someone who needs to be protected or managed, but as someone capable of handling difficult truths and making her own choices. I do see you that way, Grace said. Or at least, I am learning to. The way I was raised, men were supposed to handle the hard things and shield women from them. But you are not like any woman I have ever known. You are stronger and smarter and more capable than most men I have met. I should have recognized that from the beginning. It was not a perfect reconciliation. Trust, once broken, does not mend overnight. But it was a start, a foundation they could build on. That night, Zelda moved back into their bedroom, though she made Grace promise to respect her boundaries until she was ready for physical intimacy again. The weeks that followed were an exercise in rebuilding. Grace made a conscious effort to include Zelda in every decision, even small ones. He asked her opinion on ranch matters, discussed his plans and concerns openly. When something worried him or troubled him, he told her instead of trying to handle it alone. Zelda, slowly, began to thaw. She started smiling again, started initiating conversations and physical affection. The tension that had filled the house dissipated, replaced by a cautious warmth that grew stronger with each passing day. In late April, Zelda went into labor. Dr. Grayson came to the ranch and set up in the bedroom, sending Grace to boil water and gather clean towels. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours. Grace paced the main room, listening to Zelda's cries and feeling utterly helpless. When he finally heard the baby's first wail, Grace's knees nearly buckled with relief. Dr. Grayson emerged from the bedroom with a tired smile. "You have a son," she said. "A big, healthy boy, and Zelda did beautifully. She is exhausted, but she is going to be fine." Grace rushed into the bedroom to find Zelda propped up against pillows, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face and a radiant smile. "Meet your son," she said, carefully passing the baby to Grace. He took the infant with trembling hands, awed by how small and perfect the baby was. The boy had a shock of dark hair and his eyes, still unfocused, seemed to look right at Grace. "He is beautiful," Grace whispered. "What should we name him?" Zelda hesitated, then said softly, "I thought perhaps we could name him Grant, after your brother." Grace looked at her in shock. "Are you certain, after everything?" "Grant was meant to be this child's father in a way," Zelda said. "If circumstances had been different, if your brother had lived, I would have married him and this child might have been his. I think honoring his memory, acknowledging the role he played in bringing us together, even unknowingly, is the right thing to do." Tears blurred Grace's vision. "Grant Jameson II," he said, looking down at his son. "I promise you, little one, that I will be the father you deserve. I will love you and protect you and teach you to be a better man than I have been." The baby, blissfully unaware of his father's vow, yawned and made a small, snuffling sound. Zelda laughed softly. "I think he approves." The months after Grant Jr.'s birth were transformative. Grace discovered that fatherhood suited him, that the responsibility of caring for a tiny, helpless life brought out strengths he had not known he possessed. He was patient and gentle with the baby, changing diapers and walking the floor during late-night crying jags without complaint. Zelda recovered from the birth and threw herself into motherhood with the same passion she brought to teaching. She read books on child development and nutrition, determined to give their son every advantage. When Grant Jr. was 3 months old, she began making plans to return to teaching in the fall, arranging for a local woman to watch the baby during school hours. Grace and Zelda's relationship continued to heal and strengthen. The trust that had been broken was slowly being rebuilt, brick by brick. Grace kept his promise to be completely honest, even when the truth was uncomfortable. When he made a bad investment in cattle that cost them money, he told Zelda immediately rather than trying to hide it. When he was offered a job running a larger ranch for better pay, He discussed it with her before making a decision. They made love again for the first time 2 months after the baby was born. It was tender and emotional, both of them crying as they rediscovered each other's bodies. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Zelda traced patterns on Grace's chest with her fingertip. "I have forgiven you," she said quietly. "I am not sure exactly when it happened, but somewhere along the way the anger faded. I still think what you did was wrong, but I also understand why you did it. And more importantly, I can see that you have learned from it, that you have become a better man." Grace kissed her forehead, his heart full to bursting. "I do not deserve you, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." "You already are," Zelda assured him. "You are a good husband and a wonderful father. You work hard, you are honest with me now, and you love our son with your whole heart. What more could I ask for?" As 1884 turned into 1885, the Jameson ranch prospered. Grace's careful management and Zelda's organizational skills combined to make the operation more efficient and profitable than it had ever been. They hired 2 permanent ranch hands and expanded the herd to nearly 100 head of cattle. Zelda returned to teaching and was welcomed back by students and parents who had missed her. Grant Jr. thrived under the care of Mrs. Martinez, who watched him along with 2 other young children. The baby was happy and healthy, growing like a weed and showing signs of his father's sturdy build and his mother's dark eyes. In the fall of 1885, Zelda discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to expect. She continued teaching through December, then took a leave of absence for the remainder of the school year. Their daughter was born in April of 1886, a tiny, delicate girl with Grace's pale eyes and Zelda's dark hair. They named her Sarah, after Grace's mother, and she was doted on by everyone who met her. Grant Jr., nearly 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister and insisted on helping with everything from changing diapers to singing her to sleep. The years rolled by, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the growth of their family. In 1888, they had another son whom they named Matthew. In 1891, a second daughter arrived, Eleanor, named after Dr. Grayson, who had delivered all 4 of their children. The Jameson Ranch became one of the most successful in the region. Grace's reputation as a fair dealer and skilled rancher spread, and he was frequently consulted by neighbors seeking advice. Zelda's school gained a reputation for excellence, with families moving to Yreka specifically so their children could be taught by her. The town of Yreka grew and changed around them. The railroad expanded, bringing more settlers and commerce. Dutch Frank's rebuilt saloon became the social hub of the community. New businesses opened, including a proper library that Zelda had championed, funded by donations from townspeople and a grant from the state. Through it all, Grace and Zelda's marriage continued to deepen and strengthen. The foundation of trust they had rebuilt after Grace's deception proved solid enough to weather all the storms life threw at them. They argued sometimes, as all couples do, but they had learned to communicate honestly and work through their differences. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1893, Grace took Zelda to San Francisco for a week. It was their first real vacation, their first time away from the children and the ranch since they had married. They stayed in a fancy hotel and ate in fine restaurants. They went to the theater and visited museums. They made love with the freedom and lack of inhibition that came from knowing they would not be interrupted by a crying child. On their last night in the city, as they walked along the waterfront under a starlit sky, Zelda stopped and turned to Grace. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Regret what?" Grace asked, though he knew what she meant. "The lie," Zelda said. "The deception that started all of this. Do you ever wish you had just told me the truth that first day? Grace considered the question seriously. I regret causing you pain, he said finally. I regret the weeks where you could not trust me, where our marriage was in jeopardy. But do I regret the outcome, the life we have built together? Never. Not for a single moment. Zelda smiled and leaned into him. I asked because I do not regret it either. I used to in those dark weeks after I found the letters. But now, looking back on everything we have shared, I cannot bring myself to wish it had happened differently. If you had told me the truth that day, I might have left. I might have gone back to Philadelphia and never known what it was to be truly loved, truly valued as a partner. You would have found someone else, Grace said. Someone better than me, someone who would have courted you honestly. Maybe, Zelda conceded, but they would not have been you. And you, Grace Jameson, for all your faults and mistakes, are exactly who I was meant to find when I stepped off that train. They kissed under the stars, two people who had found each other through circumstances both tragic and serendipitous, who had built a love strong enough to survive deception and emerge even stronger. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Grant Jr. grew into a serious, thoughtful young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. He graduated from the Yreka school at the top of his class and chose to stay and work the land rather than seeking opportunities in the city. Sarah proved to have her mother's love of teaching and her father's business sense. She attended normal school in Sacramento and returned to Yreka to teach alongside her mother, eventually taking over when Zelda decided to retire. Matthew became a veterinarian, studying in San Francisco before returning to Yreka to care for the animals of the region. His skills were in high demand, and he built a thriving practice. Alina, the baby of the family, was the adventurous one. She traveled to Europe to study art and came back with a French husband and a passion for painting. She opened a gallery in Yreka, bringing culture and sophistication to the growing town. Grace and Zelda watched their children grow and flourish with pride and gratitude. They became grandparents, their house once again filled with the sounds of young voices and laughter. Grace taught his grandchildren to ride and care for cattle, passing on the skills his father had taught him. Zelda read them stories and taught them letters, instilling in them a love of learning. In 1910, Grace and Zelda celebrated their 27th wedding anniversary. Grace was 60 years old, his hair gone silver and his face deeply lined by years of sun and wind. Zelda was 53, still beautiful to Grace's eyes, still the woman who had stepped off that train and changed his life forever. They sat on the porch of the house they had shared for nearly 3 decades, watching the sun set over the mountains. Grant Jr. ran the ranch now with Matthew's help, leaving Grace free to enjoy a semi-retirement. Zelda had given up teaching 5 years earlier, content to spend her days with her grandchildren and her books. "We have had a good life," Zelda said, taking Grace's hand in hers. "The best," Grace agreed. "Better than I ever deserved." "We both deserved it," Zelda corrected gently. "We worked for it, fought for it, built it together from nothing." Grace thought about his brother Grant, dead now for nearly 3 decades. He thought about the young man who had never gotten the chance to meet Zelda, to build a life with her. Grace had long ago made peace with what he had done, had accepted both the guilt and the joy that came from his choice. "I like to think Grant would be happy for us," Grace said. "That if he could see what we built, the family we created, he would forgive me for taking what was meant to be his." "I think he would be proud," Zelda said. "Proud of the man you became, the father you are, the life you built. And I think he would be glad that his sacrifice, however unintentional, led to something beautiful." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Inside the house, They could hear their grandchildren playing, their daughter Alina's voice calling them to dinner. This was what Grace had fought for, lied for, nearly lost. This family, this home, this woman by his side. In the end, Grace Jameson lived to the age of 78, dying peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1928. Zelda held his hand as he passed, whispering words of love and gratitude for the life they had shared. She followed him 2 years later, her heart finally giving out after 7 decades of loving fiercely and living fully. They were buried together on the hillside overlooking the ranch, beneath a cottonwood tree that Grant Jr. had planted in honor of the uncle he had never met. Their headstone was simple, bearing just their names and the years of their lives, but the legacy they left behind was anything but simple. 4 children, 12 grandchildren, and eventually 23 great-grandchildren carried on the Jameson name and the values Grace and Zelda had instilled in them. The ranch continued to operate, passed down through generations. The school Zelda had built into an institution of excellence continued to educate children for decades to come. But perhaps their greatest legacy was the proof that love, even when born from deception and desperation, could transform into something pure and true. That 2 people, brought together by tragedy and lies, could build a foundation strong enough to last a lifetime. That the wrong bride, stepping off that train in 1882, had been exactly the right woman for the cowboy who looked at her once and knew, despite all logic and morality, that she was meant to be his. Their story was passed down through the family, embellished and romanticized with each retelling, until it became legend. The tale of how Grace Jameson had claimed his brother's bride, had lied and deceived and nearly lost everything, but had ultimately found redemption through love and honest living. It was a story that reminded every generation that followed that love is not always simple or easy, that it sometimes requires sacrifice and forgiveness, and the courage to choose trust over fear. And in Yreka, California, where the mountains still stand eternal against the sky and the seasons still turn with predictable rhythm, the Jameson legacy endures. A testament to one cowboy's desperate gamble, one woman's capacity for forgiveness, and the beautiful, complicated, utterly human story of 2 people who found in each other everything they had been seeking, even if they had not known what they were looking for when their eyes first met across a dusty train platform on a summer day in 1882.